Engineer and Allied Sciences in 1993 to 96. Additional DGHS, Ministry of Health, Government of India, and former Director PGIMER in 1991, and Medical Superintendent, Safdarjung Hospital. He has published 9 books and over 200 scientific papers. He has been a board member of World Federation of Mental Health, and he has expertise in the areas of social psychiatry, health policy, medical education, and planning, and has been a strong advocate of human rights of mental patients. Dr. Sharma.
Thank you. You know, this whole symposium, if we can divide, it could be divided into 2 parts. One was, so far we had spent more time on alcohol on different systems of the body, whether it was the brain, whether it was the liver, or on those parts which how to prevent and how to treat it. You know, different situation. The second session actually where I was asked to talk was on developing a national alcohol policy. Dr. Rajkumar had actually talked some of these things. There are 3 keywords in my. One was on the national policy, which is evidence-based, and the third is what are the challenges. You know, all these 3 things are interlinked, and we have to understand them. First is alcoholism is human behavior. You know, this why we do something and why we don't do. So we have to understand the basic mechanism of the human behavior, and behavior is the guiding principle, whatever we do. The focus of my talk will be on 4 issues related to alcohol policy. First, on the history of alcohol policy. Some of the thing was mentioned by Dr. Rajkumar recently, but I said history is the same, but the interpretation is different by different people. You know, like history is a kind of a screen for which each generation projects. And this is one of the major flaws, that when we see the facts and how we interpret it. So what he had put something which I would like to interpret in a different way. The second is magnitude and pattern of use, which Dr. Rajkumar has beautifully highlighted. What are the biological, social, and economic determinants? What are the challenges and the need to develop a policy which is feasible and which is implementable? You know, like for example, Dr. Garg said about talking about alcohol, and they say the reality is only when you take alcohol. You know that message which so sometimes we give a message which has double meaning. And actually this in the alcohol and drug and smoking, they always give a double meaning. Say for example in Delhi, you know, there used to be, when heroin and other things were very, very popular, hero in you can kill you. No, but you know, just see simple thing. Here, no, it means, yes, a young man would say, I want to be hero, let me kill me. No, so actually when they don't want to stop, and the government spends money to indirectly promote it. If you see the like earlier, you know, I was in the ministry, you know, like on cigarette smoking is dangerous to health, and they would show a very young, smart, healthy boy with a young girl sitting behind you on a fast motorbike. Now, what message you want to give? Now, this is actually, you know, the advertisement plays an important. You know, there was a Watson in end of the last century. He was a psychologist at Harvard, a great psychologist. He used to go once. He was an advisor to the Camel cigarette company, and he was paid the highest money. And his purpose was how to advertise and how to sell, marketing. So he's actually the father of marketing in the world. So history of alcohol policy. Ancients were familiar with the problem associated with excessive drinking and sought to protect their societies from alcohol ill effects. What Dr. Rajkumar said about the beer and other things, what's it like the Egyptian dynasties were destroyed because of alcohol. Now this is a different interpretation. It was in use is a different thing, but they were used, but they were also destroyed. Similarly, in the Chinese, you know, excessive drinking was also discouraged in Greece. This is and very interesting. Say those who drank in Greece, that they were barbarians. Say the civilized people would not drink. Now that has a different message. But what Plato also said very interestingly, like most of the Western countries and India, that you don't sell below the age of 18 years. So, and the reason being that as a precaution against, because they are excitable. They are excitable so that they should be prevented. But they experienced at that time. In the Middle Ages, the physicians began to describe specific pathologies resulting from excessive alcohol consumption. It was Muhammad Raziz, a Persian physician in 9th century AD, who noted that regular drunkenness could result in delirium and hemiplegia and other things. In India, alcohol soma has been celebrated in Shaivism, Tantras, many indigenous animists, and tribal traditions that celebrated alcohol in moderation, but it was not permitted by all sections of the society. It was considered a part of tamasic food, which is well documented. So, like we say, it was there. Often we argue, even in India it was there. But they do not see the history in a different context. That yes, it was there, but they had also said it was a part of tamasic food, and it was not in good. It was a colonization. I'll just say, like, the British, when they came, the laws relating to the collection and control of excise duties were framed, and the British pushed the alcohol in India. Some of you might be interested, like in 16th century, taking tea was a punishable. It was a life imprisonment for if you were taking tea, and if you were smoking cigarette, they will cut one nostril first time, second nostril in the Europe, and third time they would do the capital punishment. Why I am just talking about history? Because when the punishment is too heavy and people are not with you, the policies would not succeed. Now that lesson we have to take. So I just said preface, how to develop a policy which is implementable and which is feasible. Later prohibition became an important agenda of the civil disobedience movement. It was not the Swaraj, it was not the Khadi alone, but one of the things which these three things, the Swaraj, the indigenous material or salt movement, but alcohol. And if you read some of the documents and the articles written by Gandhi and others in the Harijan, which was one of the mouthpiece of the Congress movement, they say it would be one of our priorities when India becomes independent. Now, so there was a strong movement against alcohol across the country, prompted the makers of the Constitution to include prohibition policy in the directive principle of the Constitution. Now, I'll come, very interesting, the state shall endeavor to bring about a prohibition of the consumption of, except for medical purposes, for intoxicating. I am a doctor, all of you are a doctor. I am still yet to know which is the condition where you prescribe alcohol as a part of the treatment. And this we can understand when we read the discussions which took place in the Constituent Assembly. And those who are not in favor of, they put this rider. I was in Baroda, and I was 65 to 68, the professor, and I started. And one of my neighbor was, civil surgeon who was living. His maximum practice was he will give certificate that this man requires alcohol for medical purpose. And till today, this is practice. It was practiced in Bombay, when till they were. So actually what has happened, but one other part which was there, though I was in Baroda and I was in Goa where the alcohol was freely available, there were, there were many people who were dying of illicit liquors and all those things. But they were not alcoholic as such. There were a lot of inhibition. So these are the policies which we have. Today, taxes generated from alcohol production and sale is the major source of revenue in most of the states and has been cited as a reason for permitting alcohol. There are 4 states even today, Gujarat, Mizoram, Manipur and Nagaland, have enforced prohibition. You know, Dr. Rajkumar had mentioned about Haryana and Andhra. Those experiments were failure because people never wanted that policy to succeed. Now, magnitude varies from country to country. Islamic states has no place for alcohol. Countries which have few controls of any kind, and there are countries which have long tradition of restrictive control. So actually it varies from place to place. Say for example in India, recently there was a report that the per capita consumption of the alcohol is highest in Kerala and the lowest in Kashmir. Now again, the religion plays an important part. The Kerala was also counted as some, the per capita consumption high. But if you see in Kerala also, a little more, the northern part of Kerala and southern part of Kerala, the rate is not, incidence is not the same. Because in Kerala, there are three distinct communities: the Christians, the Hindus, and Muslims. It is highest among the Christians, second Hindus, and third the lowest. So actually these are the factors which we have to take into account if we have to develop a reasonable, feasible, implementable policy. As I said that in my opening, that drinking is a human behavior. That is of great interest. Drinking viewed in relation to culture and religion, social part. While considering any policy, we have to also consider what is the physical harm, psychological harm, social well-being, or economic problem. The prevalence of alcohol problem is changing globally with the increase in developing countries. It's very interesting. But decrease in developed countries. Say for example in USA, you would be surprised that at least 32%, which is increasing more, of the people don't drink. So you say that 32%, now when USA, in 1930s and so, when there was alcohol was introduced, and illicit alcohol was there, they have to reverse. So one has to, when you develop a policy, one has to see that how that policy can be implemented. The magnitude of the resultant negative outcome of health, economic and social outcome on family and public disorder is substantial. India is one of the largest producer of alcohol, in the world, and contributes to 65% of production and nearly 7% of imports into the region. The precise estimate of unrecorded alcohol production and consumption is not clearly known. Alcohol being a state subject, the policies formulated by all the states have been primarily with a view to increasing taxes and not from public health point of view. Variation in tax policies have also led to great grey market as spurious and smuggled liquor is easily available to the population. No precise estimates can be made about the alcohol prevalence in India. Because the methodology issues are quite, even like I remember the ministry, that time we could not see how many medical colleges are in this country. If you see the MCI will give this figure and Ministry of Health would give. The number may vary from 1 or 2, but the question is why that should vary. So actually that our population, our population, data are so poor. However, a collective review reveals that 30% of adult men and 3% of adult women consume alcohol, but the numbers are growing. So recently there was a report in Bangalore that the women were drinking more than the men, as far as the Bangalore city was concerned. So that actually when we talk about India, we must talk which part of India you're talking, which group of India you're talking. This is from a policy perspective, it has been identified that India has nearly 62 million users, 70 of them who are alcohol dependent. Its increasing availability and use has also brought other problems affecting both the individual and society. Efforts to tackle the problem have been piecemeal, fragmented, resulting in lack of direction and proper focus. The emerging trend includes initiation of alcohol use at early age, greater consumption of among women and youth, and greater permeation of the alcohol use in rural and semi-urban areas which were not there earlier, increasing preference for beverages with high alcohol content, hazardous and harmful alcohol use. I always used to say that health professionals are slow learners. Because they don't, say for example, when you want to send the health message, it takes, family planning, last 70 years we have failed. India was one of the first country. But when they want to sell the latest model of the tea or a Vodafone, in a month they can reach to remotest place. So actually we have not learned how to market and how to sell our ideas properly. And as a health professional, as a health planners, as a health administrator, it is our responsibility to learn from them. Sale of alcohol has been growing steadily. 6 to 8%, as Dr. Rajkumar has also said. People drink at earlier age than previously. The mean age has gone down. Changing and social norms, urbanization increase, because globalization has changed. Globalization has 3 components, which has, first, globalization is controlled by the ideology of economics. The secondly, the globalization is controlled by the technology. The third is globalization is also controlled by the power of media or communication. And we have to say that because anything happened today in any part of the world, it reaches your bedroom immediately, which was not possible. So actually any message, whether it's negative or positive, it reaches to the fastest and to the remotest part. A powerful international and domestic alcohol lobby is purposely targeting young Indians. The local industry has introduced flavored alcohol drinks to attract previously non-drinking women and young men. Because some alcohol is not for receptors, tongue receptors were not very good, they would not like it. So now even they would see that how they would like this particular thing, so they change the taste. So actually they are using the technology for their own benefit. So these are although alcohol advertising is banned in the electronic and print media, surrogate advertising is rife. Drinking water and apple juice is packed by alcohol companies. It is all about getting young people to start early and be lifelong consumers. Bollywood film now glorify alcohol, where the good guys drink. Sale at airport, I was just seeing like in Delhi, previously we could go from after the ticketing and the migration, you have to cross through all the alcohol bottles. Just see the very subtle way. And even now they are making all the airport changes, and we don't notice that this is how, that you just can't go inside unless you go through all those alcohol, this thing. So this is the technique which they are using, but these are the things which actually we have to be very careful, we have to notice. 2/3 of the alcohol drunk in India is unrecorded because it is neither illicit local homebrew or has been smuggled into the country. One barrier in developing a national alcohol policy for India is the woeful lack of data and research on its national health, social and economic effect. What is known is that alcohol-related problems account for more than 1/5 of the hospital admission, 18% of psychiatric emergencies, more than 2% of all brain injuries, as Dr. Sharma had said. The role of alcohol in domestic violence is also very high. Harmful use of alcohol results in approximately 2.5 million deaths per year and 4% of all deaths worldwide as attributed to alcohol. The alcohol-related harm is not limited to heavy drinkers or those suffering from alcohol use drinkers, but also extends to persons who drink moderately or occasionally. Again, there is a myth that you drink, it will not do any harm. But there is evidence, scientific evidence, that those who do, say for example, in pregnant women, in other young people, so even a small drink can do a lot of this thing. So actually it is not just the moderate drink and small drink will not do any harm. To address the impact of alcohol use on our society, a national policy on alcohol use is needed. The alcohol policy should include measures by the government to control supply, demand, minimize alcohol-related harm, and promote public health. Unlike in the West, documentation, as I said, is very poor. Its increasing availability and use in the last decade has also brought myriad problems affecting both the individual and society. Efforts to tackle the problem have been piecemeal, fragmented, resulting in lack of direction and focus. alcohol consumption has been steadily increasing. 62.5 million alcohol users in India. Per capita consumption of alcohol has increased like in 18 liters in Kerala to minimum in, due to in large population, India has been identified as the potential third largest market by the international company. India offered, very interesting, to cut custom duties on wines and spirits from the European Union to 40% from the present 150%. And it is because of WTO, World Trade Organizations, they campaign, because governments are not free. What was 50 years earlier, today the governments are dictated by the, many of you like say the British rule only after 1858. Before 1858, whether it was India or whether it was Southeast Asia, it was ruled by the East India Company. East India Company was what? It was a multinational company. Now, what was there before 1850, today we are seeing the same multinational companies are changing the policies of the government and other things. A recent ad in Europe, very interesting, attention liquor, beer and wine companies, this is an excellent moment to enter the Indian market. This was, the offer was huge compared to the India's earlier proposal to cut the customs duty to 80%. It would mean up to 73% point cut in India's custom duty. India also proposed to cut the entry price, which was very high, per bottle of wine, $3.7 and whiskey 5.5. Now that means what was very expensive, it will be, and it will have, like what, it means even the Indian made foreign whiskey will also disappear slowly, this. Wine legislation in the market, the Times of India, there was a recent advertisement that Indian wine on your table will soon be tastier, more authentic and healthier once India gets its wine legislation or wine laws. Now this is how they are trying. Business Standard, another important paper, alcohol beverage market booming in India. The overall liquor consumption in India is growing at a compound annual rate of about 30% and is likely to reach 20,000 million liters in the next 3 years from the current level of 7,000 million liters. This is revealed in a study titled India's Emerging Imported Spirits Market, released by the ACI, Associated Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Besides, in terms of revenue, the alcoholic beverage market is currently estimated at about 50,000 crores, and interestingly, it is likely to increase 3 lakh crore during the course of next 3 years, not for 30 years. So this is what a powerful economic, when you say the ideology of economics, when I was talking about this particular. Wine investment, business review, another. In a city like Hyderabad, the license fee for a bar is 38 lakhs per year, while a retail liquor shop has to pay 1 crore plus to obtain the same. Somebody was telling about the old bottle, which now I'm not talking about sophisticated wine or whiskey bottle, but in a city, in one of the cities in Tamil Nadu, I was there, and I was just checking like one of the third-rate shop, which is the old bottles, which are the third-rate, 1 lakh they sell every month, bottles price. This is, so that shows the amount of the alcohol which is, so this is only of the investing in wine. Now, for all of those of you who are interested in investment and shares, investing in wine is recession-proof. And that is because some of the most renowned wines, like from some select Chateau's Bordeaux in Paris, are very limited in supply, and when they would come and you invest, you will only make money and not lose anything. Now, my second talk, which I say, what are the challenges for effective alcohol policy? Because that is very important. Apart from the influence of rapid globalization, industrialization and urbanization, media influences at macro and micro level, several other barriers that also contributed to failure of policy and program initiative thus far include absence of a single national nodal ministry at the center to deal with all aspects of alcohol policy. I have been in the ministry, and I know in India. Namaskar. See, absence of a single nodal ministry at this, like health ministry has developed some national policy, but actually the control of the money is with the finance ministry. So they will dictate what they have to do it. It is quite all right that they make some good slogans. Now there is always a conflicts also between the center and the state level on issues with regard to production, distribution, taxation, and sales as alcohol being a state subject. Greater emphasis on the revenue component and promotional aspects of the alcohol use. These are the challenges, if you want to implement the alcohol policy. Increasing emphasis on either addictive drugs, we say, okay, we are not giving too much emphasis on alcohol in this, but whether Ministry of Social Justice or Health Ministry, on other heroin and other drugs, they spend more money. Absence of a rational and scientific alcohol control policy based on public health approaches. Absence of intersectorial approaches. Non-availability of good quality population-based data. Emergence of a so-called social alcohol use in major way, which was repeated often, that how it. Social policies are inherently complex and interact with others. What are the policies? Policies are fulfillment of the aspiration of the public, and they are translated into plan of action. So, what are the aspirations of the public? The government cannot decide unless we take into consideration the aspiration of the public. At the same time, governments are facing more general difficulties in exercising their traditional role. Globalization, WTO, reduction in tariff barriers, as I said about alcohol from 180 to 40%, make it more difficult to enforce tax policies, including those on alcohol. The main threats for successful government action on alcohol seems to be the following. First, create a climate in which people recognize the need for an effective alcohol policy. So we have to. Second, establish and promote a clear factual basis for the policy, develop measures openly and with the full participation of all parties likely to be involved in policy delivery and implementation, then champion the policy. The third, ensure the government's own health delivery services give the policy priority. For example, provide effective support for other deliveries. And the government has to be honest. I have seen, like for example, if they want to decide on alcohol policy, and after passing that resolution, they would say, okay, let us celebrate with the alcohol. Now this is the how they do the whole thing. What can the scientific communities contribute? Because so far we have not given emphasis on this. The scientific community in the alcohol field draws its membership from different, not one group of science. This includes medical practitioners, medical scientists, psychologists, epidemiologists, public health specialists, social scientists, pharmacologists, biochemists, geneticists, and others. They should join together and share the knowledge and then develop a plan of action, not one group. The science of alcohol and alcohol problem is hardly free of personal and political consideration, because as I said that in Constituent Assembly when this was debated, there were also the personal consideration which debated, and that kind of a policy was drawn. Now scientists and policymakers, alcohol scientists do not form a unified community. This reality. Indeed, this sector is often driven by disputes and antagonism. The private sector profit motive and social responsibility. Private sector is very powerful. They say, but the debate over the role of beverage alcohol industry raises in almost every public policy discussion of alcohol. The industry composed of producers, retailers, hospitality sectors asserts a role of helping prevent harmful use of the product, other than contend that the profit motive is the inherent conflict with the public health goal. Like some of you might be surprised that the Kingfisher 7,000 crore loss of person in Bangalore, he's happy because the alcohol has given him more, about 9,000 crores. So it does not make him much. So, this is the power of what you call the profit sector, private sector. The profit motive of business in general makes it inherently unacceptable partner in public policy. The beverage alcohol industry argues that it cannot be expected to support policies that directly affect its interests, but in which it has hard to say, because they would say why we should give money to the politicians if we are not benefited by that. These are the inherent contradiction. There are many examples of alcohol policy intervention by governments that have failed because they did not gain sufficient support from society as a whole. Consumers will always find ways of circumventing controls if alcohol policies are not considered acceptable by society. It is true of consumers today when they are confronted with higher taxes or extreme restriction on alcohol availability in one country by comparison with others. If you put more strong policy in one state, the neighboring state will supply. Both measures may lead to smuggling and to consume trading down to lower price drinks. Public support, it is true at a time when the power of a state is controlled, what consumers do is declining in many parts of the world, including India. This is something very important for us, not only every section of our society. See, for example, there was a policy when people in the OPD, you will not charge anything. For investigation, will not do anything. This was not Government of India decision. This was a decision which was dictated from somewhere else. And government was forced to follow. And the states were forced to follow, and we had to follow. So actually, there are some things which are actually beyond, and we are not part of that kind of a decision. Most citizens support some constraint on drinking behavior. Typically, here drinking may lead to harm, but prefer to be more relaxed approach to the availability, consumption of alcohol. The importance of taking cultural and historical attitude to alcohol into account is equally important. Policies are generally intended to provide framework within which benefits can be maximized and harm can be minimized. Policy design must be based on the best available evidence and a balance between rights and responsibility of those whom the policies will affect. Communities, government, non-government organizations, civil society organizations, and the private sector. How the final balance is achieved may vary according to the particular area in question. Societal views on the relationship between the individual and the state and the public palatability of the measures are the important issues. Different societies balance individual freedom and state control differently. Some are willing to accept considerable state control if it seems to be for the public good. Others emphasize the freedom of the individual and the disapproval of the state intervention in daily lives. And today with the media and other things and communication, this has become a very powerful thing. No government can dictate things if the public is not favorable. For example, in the case of cigarette smoking in public places, we have seen a move over time from virtually complete freedom from the smoker to high level restriction. I was actually in the ministry at that time when the restriction for no smoking in the aeroplanes, first. Then it came in the buses, then say public places. And how today, how things have spread, and today it has been accepted. So it was considered very carefully and implemented very slowly, but you will be surprised to know, on one side WHO was spending more money on control of tobacco consumption, but double the money was spent by the FAO, Food and Drug of the UN, how to produce more tobacco. So this is how the two wings of the same organizations work. The availability of healthcare is not infinitely elastic, and in many countries it is available large number of people for little and no direct payment. Because after all, if it has a negative effect, say for example in the state of Karnataka, a study was done, and they found what the taxes they were getting and what was the loss to that state was more than the benefit. Alcohol consumption can be looked at in terms of a spectrum that lies between the collective exercise of responsibility at one and the individual responsibility at the other. The burden of responsibility for managing the risk can be thought of as lying with society as a whole, or the emphasis can be placed on the individual freedom and individual responsibility for preventing and managing the harm. In particular, government should be responsible for protecting those who are not fully able to make their own choices. For example, children, minors, pregnant ladies. Within society, views on alcohol vary not only among different sectors involved in the government alcohol policy, government industry and the scientific community, NGOs, but also among the various players within each sector. The challenge in developing alcohol policy is to create an approach broad enough to in scope and emphasis, incapable of involving and satisfying all sections of societies, communities and individuals. Now, what is the role of the government? Now, I think I can give a very simple thing. Government is not a single entity. I remember there are certain policy which was taken and by the president is pleased to do this particular thing. But that was only applicable to one. I said that is president is one, but every ministry is there is another president. Because one ministry may agree, other ministry may not agree. So actually the government is not a single entity. No, this is a reality. Different departments within the government have different perspectives on alcohol. Agriculture and industry departments may have a general inclination against regulation and may support alcohol production. Tourism and entertainment department may wish to support the role of alcohol beverages as a contributing factor to quality of life and leisure of the tourists. Justice department are likely to have a more ambivalent position, but they are more likely to align themselves with the health sector. Health departments, meanwhile, are likely to give more priority to controlling consumption as a part of their wider remit to improve public health. So you see within the game, I have just given you examples which are very obvious and which we see every day. Then what is the role of politics and politicians? The first question is to address whether politicians are interested in alcohol policy. And if they are not, how to get them interested. So our approach should be to go with them with scientific evidence, with convincing them that how we can motivate. Policy making is a complex process of articulating diverse political, theoretical and technical points of view. Based on science, tradition, religion, prejudice, ideology, these views often oppose each other with as much hostility as political factors. The enactment of policy depends on the politicians' response to the clashing evidence and opinions presented before them. As we see today in Kerala, like one politician, one party is in favor, another is not there. Sometimes they will just try to bring that kind of a policy 2 months before the election. They say we have developed, so let the next government may not be able to implement. So these are the hidden agenda. Such responses often reflect the volatile balance of political and economic forces rather than the scientific or empirical evidence. The primary goal of effective public policy is to promote social well-being. That is our main aim, because alcohol is a commodity with potential for harm. It is reasonable to expect to be regulated so that its harmful effects minimized. The purpose of regulation is to restrict access to those communities per se consistent with the well-being of society. Drinking alcohol is a part of social cultural fabric of a nation. It is an example of human behavior that can give pleasure, but can also relate it to serious social, health and other problems that cannot be easily prevented or even reduced. The policy promoted till today have been primarily with a view to increasing taxes, not from a public health point of view. In fact, the public health importance of alcohol control has been totally neglected in the formulating policies and programs, and so far the role of the health ministry has been minimal. Today, alcohol has emerged as a major source of state revenue in several states. The economic liberalization of policy during the early 90s opened wide avenues of the global alcohol industry. Widespread corruption and illicit brewing became an integral part of the alcohol trade. Conclusion, best alcohol policies. Societies are faced with choices about how to encourage some behavior and discourage others. The second, alcohol is a collective responsibility involving all sections of society. Third, alcohol is here to stay. Need to develop fresh approach for alcohol policy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The presentation is open to questions. And are there any questions from the audience?
Thank you, sir. That was a very wonderful talk. I want to ask two questions. The first is that we all know that there is a lot of excise duty on alcohol, around let's say 400 to 600%. That's like makes alcohol very, very expensive. Now the point is that they believe that based on some European models, they believe that probably that will prevent people from buying a lot of alcohol. But at the same time, let's say for a day, let's say for a daily wager, like around a tax of 600% hike in alcohol, that will again increase the financial burden on the family. So the point is, my question is that when you are formulating a policy, how do you weigh these things?
You know, like I'll just tell you that when alcohol was there, let us say tobacco. You know, in Punjab, no excise duty, nothing, excise duty on tobacco was very high or low. But Sikh community was not smoking. Now that means there was a cultural and religious factor which played. You know, I was in Goa, I was a professor, and I would see that if you go to some Catholic house, alcohol, you know, is all occasions, not only on the happy occasions, but if it was a funeral, they would also offer the alcohol. If it was like christening ceremony of a child of one year or 2 year, you know, some drops of alcohol are. So it was permissible. But among the Hindus was not there. Now when we talk about, you know, the epidemiology and data, we do not know why, like in certain section, like the alcohol consumption is high. Like in Kerala, I think gave the example that one part were more the Christians, the Hindus and Muslims. Now in the northern part, relatively, density is more, the alcohol is less. So actually what we have to do, we have to strengthen the cultural component of those. If you see in the West, you know, Jews, they drink less. You know, Jews would do hardly any, you know, very few exceptions would be there, because they would take, but they will not be. So actually there is a cultural component which is very important. In India also there are certain sections of society where it is not permitted, and we have to strengthen those kind of a thing. What are the cultural values which we can do? Because values guide human behavior, and we have to see, because these values are learned, they are not inherent. They are learned from the family, and they are learned from what? Neighbors or peers or students and other things. So I think we have to see that how we can enhance the good values and how we can take advantage of the cultural thing.
So my point is that if you hypothetically, if you really cut
I'm
down,
these are the real which I gave
that's
example.
my question again. If you hypothetically cut down the cost of alcohol,
Yeah.
if you hypothetically cut down the cost of alcohol, do we have evidence to say that it will actually decrease like the consumption of alcohol in the country?
You know, when
Decrease or maybe increase?
you
Sorry.
know, what would happen? You know, this is like when we increase the cost. You know, for example, now the cost of the duty on custom duty is decreased from 180 to 150, now 40%. You know, now what will happen, that it means the Indian made foreign liquor, it will disappear.
Yes, sir.
If you see the history of India, you know, the Clash of Civilization, which was written by one Harvard professor about 30 years back, You know, the GDP of India till 1830 was 19%. China was 31%, America was only 11%. But after 1850, if you see that by 1890, we became 1.1, and you know, by independence we were just nothing. And the reason was because they saw to it that India becomes only a product of the raw material. You don't produce anything. You know, as a child, I can still remember during the Second World War, and which you know, we could not have an Indian made, even needle was not there, a scissor was not there, nothing was there. So because we were made incompetent, not that we were not competent. So actually that by doing this particular thing, that when they make cheap, that means the local products will disappear.
So, I have a second question also.
Or the illicit thing will increase.
Yes, my second question is like, now this alcohol is a very, very good, it's a very productive revenue earning model for a lot of states. Like you said, Kerala last year earned around 2100 crores in as revenues from alcohol. But the point is like, when we as healthcare professionals, when we ask people do not drink, is it not something like we are actually, you know, trying to break down the revenue earning model of a particular state, thereby conspiring against the government?
You know, I would not say that you don't drink. I said these are the advantage, you know.
Okay.
Say like, for example, I remember in 1965, I was in Baroda, and there was a Moraji Desai was very pro, and there was one Justice Tekchand, you know, a committee on prohibition committee, Government of India. And this 3-day symposium we were having, and I was asked to sum up the symposium. I said, after listening to all the speakers, there is one point which is very clear, which can't be debate, that if you take alcohol, there is a pleasure, social pleasure, personal pleasure, but there is a definite harm. You know, there is no, which all agreed. But if you don't take alcohol, there is certain thing that you don't have any harm.
Yes, I understood.
You know, so this is how you put it, you know, like.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah.
I was wondering, while listening to you, I would like to narrate the dilemma and the pain that one of the IAS officers in a government, he was given charge of prohibition, at the same time excise department. The same fellow was sort of taken badly as to why the revenue is going down on excise duty, and was to answer about prohibition, that you are not performing well in prohibition, you are not performing well in excise duty. And he was almost shattered, said, what do I do? Now, this is a serious affair, like corruption. We all agree that corruption must disappear. But at the same time, we have started saying that it's a way of life. I think we as policy makers have to stand by one. We can't just keep on doing this. The nation, the young generation, everybody is getting affected by alcohol badly. And yet, we are not able to formulate a policy. Say at least our literature for which we go, that it was prevalent even in Vedic days, but at least that time it was said it was a tamasic thing, and the society would look down upon the tamasic people, and most of the people were living an austerity life. Today we have to sort of come out with
no, your first question,
yes,
that the IAS officer was there and the excise duty was going. I am not an administrator, but I have some experience of administration. You know, I would immediately, you know, your question, I would say, okay, who makes this alcohol? Whether that industry have the same manpower, they are using the same amount of sugar. If they are having the same manpower, same amount of sugar and other raw material, they must produce the same alcohol. If it is producing less, it means somebody in the excise department, police department are conniving, that they show that it is only 100 boxes which are there, but it was 10,000 boxes. So excise duty will go down. This is very simple, like once I was asking one of a textile, big manager, I said, how you make black money? And he said, that if you take the raw cotton and we must produce so much cloth. But we make the raw cotton, but the cloth produced is 1/4. But 3/4 we don't pay the excise duty. So that is a black money, because we can't show it. So it is in every walk of life, So, okay, thank you then.
Thank you, sir.